you want to be taking your Bibles, and if you already have it open to the scripture reading, just you can leave it there in chapter 9. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 13, and chapter 14 this evening. It's interesting when you start reading within the history of the Hebrews, and you come to this point, as we spoke this morning, that the children of Israel wanted a king to be like other nations. Now, we realize Saul is going to be the one that's chosen as king. We're going to talk about that tonight. But he was the type of person that most people would have looked to in order to be a king in the sense of his stature. What was read for us just a moment ago, in the wording of it there in chapter 9 and verse 2, is very intriguing because it paints a picture for us. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. So everybody, the top of everybody else's head, if it was me, would be right here, and here's Saul. And so this is a man that is tall. He is seemed to be goodlier, and it says within here, there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than what he would be. And normally we don't use the word goodlier, but it's a good King James Version word, and so we think about that a little bit, and you know, he's what the people would typically look for. Now, we understand, if you go through the history, it wasn't until he was actually able to lead his first victory that the people actually got behind him. But that's not surprising, because you appoint a king over people, there's always somebody that thought it should have been from their tribe, or maybe it should have been them themselves, but the people would unite around him. Now, there's a New Testament application within this as well, because when Jesus would come to this earth, there were many that rejected him because of his stature and background from which he would be born. And so there is that typology that we have. It's on Saul this evening. All right, it's in the title of the sermon. I told you this morning I don't always title them. I titled tonight's, and it's called The Short-Comings of Saul. And I thought that was a little ironic because he's such a tall man, is that we're going to talk about the shortcomings of Saul. And so we come to chapter 10. When you come to chapter 10, we find Samuel having been revealed to it had been revealed to Samuel that it's going to be Saul. And it says, this time tomorrow a man is going to come unto you. That is the one that is to be the king. And so it's going to be Saul that's going to be this king that is to be anointed. And so he's going through this process, and it's kind of almost humorous. You know, remember last week we talked about the hemorrhoids. Now we have donkeys that went wild and ran away. And so what you have is Saul has gone with one of the servants to chase after these donkeys that had been gone for at least 3 days. Their provisions were running out. Saul is actually saying to his servant, we better go back because Father is going to stop worrying about the donkeys. He's going to be worrying about us. And so the servant actually says, there's a seer, referring to Samuel, and let's go to the seer, see if he can tell us where the donkeys are. And so I'm using the New King James translation of that. And so they decide they're going to go out there and see the seer. Saul says, I don't have anything. And so the servant says, I got a piece of silver, we'll go. And what Saul finds is a lot more than donkeys. Because what he will be revealed to him is that he is going to be the first king of Israel. And he's a little hesitant. And so what you actually have in chapter 10, starting in verse 2, is that there's going to be 3 signs that are going to be given. Samuel tells him exactly what he's going to experience. In verse 2 of chapter 10, it says, when thou art departed from me today, excuse me, then thou shalt find 2 men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say unto thee, the donkeys which thou wentest to seek are found, and lo, thy father hath left the care of the donkeys, and sorroweth for you, saying, what shall I do for my son? Now, remember what we talked about in prophecy, that whenever there is prophecy that is truly prophecy, it's very specific. And in this case here, it's exactly the number of women. It's exactly, the 2 men that's going to be by Rachel's sepulchre, exactly at the place it's going to be, and what they're going to say. And what happens, that happens. The exact same thing that was said. So what this ought to be is a sign to Saul. This Samuel, the seer, the judge of Israel, he's right. I am to be the king. Well, if that's not enough, according to verse 3, there's going to be another sign. This confirmation is going to come. It says, then shalt thou go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor. And there shall meet thee 3 men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying 3 kids, excuse me, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine. And they will salute thee, and give thee 2 loaves of the bread, which thou shalt receive of their hands. Now, again, the specificness that we have within here. Not only the men that he's going to meet, he has the place he's going to meet them, exactly what they're going to be carrying in their hand, the quantity that they have, and exactly what they're going to give Saul. Now, I understand hesitancy. I think, all of us could be hesitant if we were in Saul's shoes. And so he comes along, here's the message about the donkeys. But then once that's fulfilled and you come, and you find exactly the 3 men, the kids, the loaves of bread, they give you exactly what you said. This ought to be a sign that he understands, it's confirmed that he is going to be the king of Israel. But there's a third sign that God is going to give him. Because in verse 5 it says, and thou shalt come to the hill of God, where is the garrison of the Philistines. It shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place, with a psaltery, a tabret, and a pipe, and a harp before them, and they shall prophesy. And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do at the occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. So here we have this sign that's being given, that you're going to go to where the prophets are, and it's going to be at this location where the Philistines' garrison is, and the Spirit will come upon you that you will start prophesying with the prophets. All this comes to fruition if you read the following verses. Even to the point that people are perplexed. How is Saul being able to prophesy? What's going on with this? So Saul, at this point in time, having spoke to Samuel, being told this, receiving all this, ought to understand that he is to be the next king of Israel. The first point I want to notice tonight, though, in Saul's shortcomings is the idea of him avoiding his responsibility. Look at verse 20. When Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. And when he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of my tribe was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they sought him, he could not be found. He's already been told the selection process is going to be him. And so it comes down, and it's supposed to be him in verse 22. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. He's hid himself. HCSB translations actually translate this passage in order to say he's hid himself among the provisions. So here is the time, the selection of the king. It's been clearly shown to him by God that it is to be him, and he's supposed to be appointed. And where is he found? He's off hiding, avoiding his responsibilities. I look to that today, brethren, and sometimes that can be a shortfall even to us. You want to look to the problems that we have around this world. And most of the time it's when we fail to take, or we avoid and we fail to take on the responsibilities that God has given us. I'm a firm believer. You've heard me say this time and time again. You continue to hear it. The problems we face in society start in the home. And so much of the time where the problems come is when we have mothers that don't take their responsibilities. But let's not just say mothers, because how many fathers don't take their responsibilities? You have deadbeat dads. That's the way they're referred to sometimes. You have what I've seen often to be the case is childish fathers that they've yet to grow up themselves. And you have in these homes a man and a woman, and they're dwelling there, but they're not being the father and mother that God has designed them to be for those children. It's not only in the home, though. If you think about it in the Lord's church, there is a great need for the men to be able to proclaim the gospel. We need it desperately. I cannot tell you the number of phone calls or texts or emails I receive of congregations looking for a gospel preacher. Now, granted, some of them are in congregations that it needs a man that can be bivocational. But they need a man that can come in and to be able to proclaim the gospel for them. And we put forth the call over and over again of trying to get young men to train and to get people to dedicate themselves. But yet, they avoid that responsibility. Congregation after congregation that I know of, suffering for deacons, suffering for elders. The first qualification of the work of an elder certainly is that he should desire the work. And I know congregations that I've spoken with, and they talk about future elders, and they say, well, we have old so-and-so, but he doesn't desire the work. He meets every other qualification, but he doesn't desire the work. And while somewhat I can understand that, at the same time, that would be the proverbial hiding among the supplies, the stuff. When there's a call going forth. There are congregations that are struggling to have Bible school teachers. But yet there are ladies, I'm trying to spread this around on guys and gals tonight. There are ladies that won't answer the call to teach those Bible classes. They're off hiding somewhere among the stuff. We have got to make sure, if we don't want to be like Saul and have his shortfalls, we don't avoid our responsibilities. Let's do what it is that God has called us to do in life. Second, we need to make sure that we don't assume responsibilities that are not ours. Go to chapter 13 with me, if you will. Certainly, I'm not going to try and cover everything, that is possible to cover within all of this. Time would not allow for me to cover all of it. But I really want to focus in on this idea of his shortfalls. Chapter 13, beginning in verse 9, we understand that it says, and Saul, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. Now what had happened is he had gone to Gilgal, and he was supposed to be waiting on Samuel to come and to be able to offer. Samuel being the priest, and only the priest under the law would be able to approach God with offerings for the people. Now back here we got a hesitant Saul that doesn't really want to take the kingship, but now we've gone forward just about 2 years, and he's ready to go forth into battle. He's ready to take care of things, and he's upon there at Gilgal, gets impatient, and so he decides, well, Samuel's not here, I'll just go ahead and offer the sacrifice for the people. Well, what we find out when you keep reading there, and it came to pass in verse 10 that as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and burned an offering. I find it intriguing that he says, I forced myself. I really didn't want to do it, but it needed to be done, so I guess I will be the one to do it. And Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, which we know is going to be David later. And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. So here's, on one hand, we notice him avoiding responsibility. Now he assumes a responsibility that is not his. And brethren, we can sometimes have the same problem today. And that you have people assuming responsibilities that do not belong to them. The public proclamation of the Word of God is a prime situation in which we understand that it says that a woman is not to be able to fulfill those roles within the Lord's church. In the public proclamation, when you have men and women that are gathered, I want to qualify all that. But you realize there are congregations around that are putting women in pulpits, putting them in order to be able to lead. And it didn't start off in the pulpit. It started off, well, let's let them wait on the table. All they're doing is passing the trays. And so I started doing that, and then suddenly it was a prayer. And another situation I know where they were pushing the role of women within that is that they started putting her teaching children on stage in front of the congregation, because she's not really teaching the audience, she's teaching the kids. Now you see the problem with that, don't you? And what is that? Assuming a role in which God has not given them. It could be men within a congregation. We are called to submit ourselves to the obedience that the elders have and their rule over us. We are to support them. We are to obey them. There are many congregations when the elders will put forth the teachings and they will put forth what they want to lead the congregation, and that you have men that will rise up and lead a group away to stand against the eldership. That's assuming a role that God had not given them. We could think over and over again the idea when we think about children. Now, I try and relate every sermon as much as I can. I was telling somebody just the other day, when you're preaching, it's kind of the shotgun effect. You're trying to hit as many folks as you can at once, because we're sitting here in different backgrounds, different situations, and so I try and make this applicable to as many people. Children, when you disobey your parents and you try and run your house, you have assumed a responsibility that God has not given you, because He gave your parents to be the heads of those houses, to rule their homes. We need to make sure when we walk through life that we learn not to assume a responsibility that's not ours. That is displeasing to God. So he tried to make sure that he avoided responsibility. Then he assumed a responsibility that he wasn't supposed to have. The third point that I would make comes from chapter 15, verses 1 through 9. And that's the idea of abandoning his responsibility. Now, Samuel, verse 1, said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way, and when he came up from Egypt. Now go. And verse 3 is important here. Chapter 15, verse 3. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. You slay them all. That's the command. So what is his responsibility? You go against the Amalekites and you kill them. And you don't leave a man, you don't leave a woman, you don't leave a donkey, you don't leave a camel, don't you leave an ox, don't you even leave an infant, don't you leave the suckling, you don't leave sheep. Slay them. God's very clear here. He has a responsibility that God told him to fulfill. Verse 4. Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telem, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And I want you to jump down to verse 9. But Saul and the people spared, Agag. Now if we just stop there, that'd be bad enough, because it says that you kill all the men, all the women. Agag is a man. He should be killed. Because why? God said do it. And Saul's responsibility is to fulfill the command that God gave him. And so, you keep reading. And the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. So here's his responsibility. You go, you kill it all, wipe it out. But it comes down to it, I'm going to spare the king, and you know what? That camel over there, that looks too good to be killed. Let's hold on to it. Certainly God wouldn't want us to be a poor steward, I'm sure. We'll hang on to that. And that fatling over there, I'm sure he didn't mean that. And so what did they do? They chose to keep part of it, of the command, and fulfill just a part of it. They keep what they found good, and what was vile and refuse, that's what they threw away. Now, I know companies that are told to get rid of stuff. And when those companies are told to get rid of stuff, it actually means to destroy that stuff. And there can be reasons for it. Now, there's other times they're told to get rid of it. They really don't care if you destroy it or not. At Sears, when we're told to get rid of certain things, it meant destroy it. It had to go into the compactor and destroy it when I worked there. And the reason being is, in the past, they had gotten rid of certain items, and they allowed people to take them home and stuff, and then suddenly they're showing back up for warranty work. And so they're fixing stuff that was supposed to have been thrown away, and not only did they lose the money from getting rid of it without selling it, they're losing money on the other product that they're trading off to trade it out with. And so we were under strict orders, even to a point that if we were to be found, because there were times they had push mowers brand new in the box, and we were told to put them into the trash compactor to crush them and destroy them. Y'all, that hurts your feelings to do it, just by so you know. I know what that order is like from that sense. But there's a reason behind that order. And if we were found to have accidentally set one of those aside into our truck, we would have been fired. Now here is Saul, the king of Israel, told you go in utterly destroy it, but he decides, I'm going to hang on to part of it. Y'all, he abandoned his responsibility. If you go back into what we were reading this morning and the warning that was given, I believe it was back in chapter 12, verse 24. Excuse me. He says, only fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he hath done for you. But if you shall still do wickedly, you shall be consumed, both you and your king. Saul's responsibility was to lead his people in obeying the commands of God, and he abandoned it here. And today we can do the same thing. I see this different as avoiding responsibility, because avoiding comes to the idea of just trying not to take it on. But the abandoning is you take the position of responsibility, but then you just don't fulfill what you're supposed to do. Elders that don't shepherd the flock, that's abandoning the responsibility. Deacons that don't fulfill the responsibility that the elders have placed upon them would be abandoning the responsibility. Preachers that don't preach the truth from the pulpit but begin to tickle the ears of the listeners. Those are men that abandon the responsibility that has been placed before them. And yes, they will be held accountable. Be not many masters, knowing that you shall receive the greater condemnation. To the parent, to go back to Eli, dealing with his children, that he failed to restrain them. To the parent that will not restrain their children, that will not give them discipline. That's abandoning the responsibility. And when we fail to keep God's law and to follow him, we have abandoned our responsibilities as Christians. So we don't want to be like Saul. We don't want to avoid the responsibility, that we don't take it upon ourselves. We don't want to assume responsibilities that are not ours. We also don't want to abandon the responsibility once we've taken it. And then the final point that I'll leave you with is we don't want to abuse the responsibility. Acts chapter 14, second time, I'm not going to read all of it. But you can read this, really the whole chapter is what I would encourage you to go back up and read. You have Jonathan that's been off, and the faith that he has is incredible. And he goes forth by fighting the battle. And let's start reading in verse 24. I want to make sure I get this. Chapter 14, verse 24. So it says, and the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. Now you think about that for a moment. If we go more than 2 hours without eating, we think we're famished, don't we? But you're told all day, you don't eat of your food because my enemies are going to be destroyed before you're going to do that. And so how does it describe the people? The men of Israel were distressed that day. Now we're not talking about just any day sitting around the house. We're talking about a day of battle, of hiking and moving and labor, and we understand that type of stuff requires a lot of calories. You're burning those calories and all of a sudden you're out there. Can't you imagine the distressed nature of these men? That they're beginning weak. They're probably getting, their stomachs are bothering them. They could be getting dizzy, faint, faint within there. Verse 25, and all the land, and all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey on the ground. And when the people were coming to the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath, wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Then answered one of the people and said, verse 28 is where we are, thy father straitly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man that eateth any food this day. And the people were faint. Then said Jonathan, my father hath troubled the land. See, I pray you how mine eyes have been enlightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found, for had there not been now a much greater slaughter among the Philistines? And they smote the Philistines that day from Michmash, to Ajalon, and the people were very faint. And so you start seeing this. Even Jonathan can see the abuse of the responsibility that Solomon would have here, that he would forbid the very people he was to lead and to be the provider and the caretaker of. We understand in the military, even today, that the leaders, platoon leaders, the commanders, they don't eat until their troops have been provided for. You make sure your troops have the equipment that they need. You care for the troops. And here he is as the leader, and he lets his arrogance get to the point, no one's going to eat this day until I have my vengeance. Jonathan's in the same condition. He eats of it, not hearing this, and it says his eyes were enlightened, is that he got his strength back. And he says, how foolish, my father, that if they would have just eaten of the spoils that we had from the Philistines, then we could have slaughtered them even more. But why? Because he abused his power. You know, sometimes this can happen. Sometimes parents can be too hard upon children. Have you ever seen a father that abused a child? The one that he's supposed to be nurturing and bringing along, that he's supposed to be giving love and care for, but instead he does things to that child's detriment. Elders are warned, don't lord over the flock, because that can turn into what? Abuse of power. Abuse of the responsibility that we've been given. We need to be careful that in whatever fashion of life that we find ourselves in a position of responsibility, that we make sure we don't abuse that to the detriment of those in which we are to be leading. It goes on, and it's amazing to me that Saul is actually prepared to kill Jonathan, his son, because he ate a little honey when he was weak. How do you get to that point? You get to a point that here's this man, he avoided trying to take that responsibility on to begin with. He fails God, abandoning his responsibility. He assumes responsibilities that's not there. And then in abuse of his responsibility, his power, he puts forth a decree, and out of arrogance and lack of a better word, stupidity, he's now in a position, he's putting his son before to kill the people. And the only reason he didn't kill Jonathan is because the Israelites, the people which he was supposed to be leading, saw the ignorance in what he was about to do. No wonder No wonder that we could sit there and it would read from the words of Samuel that God would seek out a king that would be after his heart, to be over his people, there in chapter 13 and verse 14. Because Saul, he might be head and shoulders above all those in that nation of Israel. It may have been the type of man that you look to and say, now that's a king. But whenever it comes to the matters that truly mean something, he had shortfalls. And he was not the leader which they needed. Throw this in there just for comparison real quick. I find it incredibly intriguing of how Saul would be pursuing David, the next king, in order to kill him. And Jonathan, you would think, being the son of the existing king, would have a problem with David himself. One cannot help but wonder if he doesn't go back to this, my foolish father. Because he knew what it was like to be ready to be killed by Saul. He saw the foolishness of the father to the point that it's actually Jonathan at times is the reason David's life would be spared, to be that leader, that the nation of Israel desperately needed. God desperately needs you. He needed Saul to be the leader. He appointed him. The potential was there. I understand God knew ultimately what Saul would do, but at the same time, there's still free will that Saul could have taken on this responsibility and followed it in the right way. God needs you. As I said, I speak on just to a lot of different people right now. Speak to those that want to be potential deacons and elders and to be preachers of the gospel, to some that are fathers in here, some that are mothers, others that are grandfathers and grandmothers, some that are bosses at work, some that, you think about what your role is. God needs you to accept your responsibility. That starts with not avoiding becoming a Christian. You've got to decide that, yes, God has called me. He's called all of us through Jesus Christ to be his child, to be joint heirs together with Jesus. And so why would you avoid that? Do you want to go hide among the stuff tonight? If you're not a child of God and we sing the song of invitation and you don't respond, I want you to envision yourself that you are Saul and you're off hiding among the stuff because you're avoiding the responsibility of being a Christian. Perhaps you're in a condition that you have abandoned your responsibility or assumed responsibility that's not yours, and you're not in the faithful condition as a child of God tonight. We're going to encourage you to seek forgiveness of that and come back. God has called you. He needs you in the kingdom. You serve an important role. Will you accept that responsibility as together we stand and sing?